You are standing ankle-deep in human urine. It is not a punishment. It is your job. The city outside smells like bread and fish sauce and summer stone. Inside this building, it smells like ammonia and wet wool and the specific chemical signature of other people's lives being cleaned away. You are the one cleaning them. You are a slave. You are 21 years old. You were taken from Macedonia when you were 17, sold at a port you will never see again, and brought here, to Pompeii, to this laundry on the Via dell'Abbondanza, to these basins of alkaline solution and stacked garments, to make the togas of wealthy Romans white enough to announce their status from across the street. The toga you are trampling right now belongs to a magistrate's household. You do not know his name. He does not know yours. Above you, the mountain is quiet. It has been quiet your entire life. The vineyards on its slopes are producing the finest wine in Campania, and the city at its feet is prosperous and loud, and absolutely certain it will be here forever. It will not be here forever, but you do not know that yet. You know the crack in the third stall's basin floor. You know how wet wool resists your feet at dawn and submits by mid-morning. You know the exact sound of Stephanus's sandals on stone when something has gone wrong with the accounts. You know that Drusus, who has been here 11 years, almost never speaks before the midday rest, and that Philemon, who arrived 6 months ago, still sits up at night holding his knees. You know all of this, and none of it will save you. What will happen to this city, to this street, to this building, to the people inside it, is already decided. It is written in the mountain. It is written in the summer heat that has not broken in weeks. It is written in the faint tremors that the city is beginning, without understanding, to feel. Tonight you will sleep in a room 4 meters by 3. Tomorrow you will be back in the basin before the light arrives. But there is a great deal of this life still left to live. This is Quiet History at Bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, imagine. You are standing in a city that does not know it is going to die. The mountain above it has been still for longer than anyone can remember. The vineyards on its slopes are the best in Campania. The road that runs past your door, the Via dell'Abbondanza, is one of the busiest streets in the Roman world, and on most mornings, if you stop long enough, you can hear everything that is happening in this city without moving an inch. The shouting of a merchant, the creak of a cart, the sound of water moving through stone. You are inside a building that smells like something the city would rather not think about. In the basins where you stand, there is human urine collected from every street corner in Pompeii. There is the weight of other people's togas pressing against your bare feet. There is a man across the courtyard who does not look at you, because looking at each other costs something neither of you can afford. There is the knowledge, carried somewhere behind your ribs, that you have not been free since you were 17 years old. Before the sun burns off the morning fog, you will have trampled cloth for 2 hours. Before midday, you will have rinsed, wrung, and carried more weight than your body wants to hold. Before the mountain wakes up, years from now, on a morning that begins just like this one, this city will be gone. But that is not today. Today, there is only the water, the stone, the smell, the work. Your name, in the language your mother gave you, was Nicias. The Romans called you whatever was convenient. In the ledger of Stephanus, the owner of the fullonica where you have lived and worked for the past 4 years, you are listed as a single letter beside a number. The letter does not matter. The number is the price he paid for you at the market in Puteoli, the great trading port on the bay south of Naples, where ships from the eastern Mediterranean unload grain, wine, silk, and people. He paid 2,000 sesterces. That is the average price for an unskilled young male slave in the 1st century of this empire. You were not considered skilled. You were considered healthy, reasonably strong, and young enough to be useful for many years. The man who sold you ran his hand down your arm the way a farmer runs his hand down the foreleg of a horse. He checked your teeth. He made you stand straight. None of this is a memory you visit often, but it is a memory you keep, the way you keep a stone in a closed fist, hard, permanent, entirely yours. You were 17 when the soldiers came to your village in Macedonia. That is where this story begins, though it does not begin there for the people of Pompeii. For them, this story begins with a toga they need cleaned before a dinner party. For them, this story is a transaction, a garment dropped off in the morning, coins placed in an outstretched hand, a toga returned 2 days later pressed and bright and smelling of sulfur rather than sweat. They do not think about who did the pressing. You are the reason their clothes are clean, and you are invisible to them, which is exactly how Rome prefers it. You are 21 years old now. You do not know what month it is in the Macedonian calendar. You know it is the month the Romans call August, Sextilis. Some of the older ones still call it, before Caesar's nephew remade the calendar in his own name. You know it is the summer of the year the Romans number as the 79th year of the Common Era. The summer is brutal. It has been brutal for weeks. The air above Pompeii sits heavy and wet and does not move. And inside the fullonica, where the basins hold warm water and chemicals and soaking cloth, the heat is something you live inside rather than merely feel. Outside, through the arched entrance on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the city is already moving. Pompeii is not a large city by Roman standards. It covers roughly 66 hectares, a rectangle of stone and plaster and tile pressed against the southern slope of Vesuvius, a few miles inland from the sea. Its population at this moment in history is somewhere between 11,000 and 20,000 people, depending on which scholar is counting and which neighborhood is in season. It sits in the region of Campania, in the shadow of the Apennine Mountains, in the middle of one of the richest agricultural territories in the empire. The soil around Pompeii grows extraordinary wine. The sea nearby yields fish. The roads that connect it to Naples and Rome and the port at Stabiae move goods in every direction. It is, by any measure, a prosperous city. It is also a city built on the labor of people who are not free. Walk 10 people down the Via dell'Abbondanza at this moment in the 79th year, and 3 or 4 of them are owned by the other 6. You are one of those 3 or 4. You feel it not as a number, but as the specific texture of every morning, the stone floor under your bare feet before sunrise, the absence of any choice about what the day contains, the weight of understanding that everything you produce, every clean toga, every brightened length of wool, every pressed and folded garment returned to a client who barely looks at you, generates wealth for a man who considers you a line in a ledger. Stephanus is not a cruel man. You have known cruel men. He feeds you. He does not beat you without reason. In the logic of Roman slavery, this makes him tolerable, and tolerance is the ceiling you have learned to live beneath. You rise before the first light. Your sleeping space is at the back of the fullonica, in a room that was before Stephanus converted this building from a house to a laundry, probably a storage cupboard. It is roughly 4 meters by 3 meters. You share it with 2 other slaves, a boy of perhaps 15 named Philemon, who arrived 6 months ago and still flinches at loud sounds, and an older man, a Greek like you, who goes by the name Drusus, though that is almost certainly not his name either. Drusus sleeps on his side and does not move until he absolutely has to. Philemon sleeps curled tight, knees to chest, the way a child sleeps when the world is uncertain. The bed is a wooden frame with a woven rope base. The mattress is a sack of compressed wool scraps, the leftover material from garments that have been processed in the workshop, the bits too small and too degraded to be returned to clients. It smells like the fullonica because everything in your life smells like the fullonica. You stopped noticing it sometime in the 2nd month. Now you only notice it when you see the faces of visitors who step through the entrance and pause for half a second before arranging their expression into something polite. You dress in the dark. Your clothing is a simple linen tunic, belted at the waist with a cord of twisted wool. The tunic reaches your knees. It is clean. You work in a laundry, and even a slave in a laundry manages to have clean clothes, which is a minor and somewhat bitter irony you have considered before. The fabric is undyed, which marks your status as surely as any chain. In Pompeii, color is money. The togas you clean are white wool, worth more than your monthly food ration. The deep reds and saffrons worn by wealthy merchants on the Via dell'Abbondanza cost more than a year of a legionary's wages. Your tunic is the color of things that have not been given any color at all. You step out of the sleeping room into the fullonica's inner courtyard. The building you work in is one of the most complete industrial laundries in the Roman world. It was excavated centuries from now, between 1912 and 1914, along this very street, and what the archaeologists found was a structure that had been converted from a private house into a working fullonica within the last generation. The original floor plan, atrium, peristyle, garden, is still visible beneath the industrial additions. The atrium, which in a wealthy home would have held a decorative pool to catch rainwater, has been fitted with large stone basins for rinsing. The garden at the back has been transformed into a working area. The upper terrace, reached by a narrow staircase you have climbed so many times that your feet know each step without looking, is where the cloth is dried and treated with sulfur. The basins in the atrium are fed by a pipe connected to the city's water supply. Pompeii has remarkable infrastructure. The aqueduct that serves the city branches from the main Augustan aqueduct at Misenum, runs through a central distribution tower called the Castellum Aquae at the northern edge of town, and then feeds the city through a network of lead pipes buried beneath the streets. Your basins receive this water continuously. Pompeii has over 40 public fountains at this moment in history, and many private citizens carry their water from these rather than from private pipes. The fact that the fullonica has a direct connection to the water supply is a significant economic advantage for Stephanus. You lower yourself into the first treading stall. The treading stalls are small niches built into the walls at the back of the atrium, separated by low dividers of plastered stone that reach roughly to your hip. Each stall holds a round stone basin, perhaps 1.5 meters in diameter, slightly deeper than your ankle when full. The mixture in the basin this morning is water and urine. The urine has been collected from the clay jars set into the pavement of the Via dell'Abbondanza just outside the building's entrance, small vessels that the city's residents and passers-by use as public urinals, and which Stephanus, like every fullonica owner in Pompeii, empties regularly into his processing basins. Urine is the most important cleaning agent in the fullonica. This is not an approximation, it is a chemical fact. Urine, as it ages, produces ammonia, which is a natural alkaline compound that dissolves the greases and oils trapped in the weave of wool fibers. The Romans did not know the word ammonia. They did not have the vocabulary of chemistry, but they had understood, for centuries before this moment, that urine worked on cloth the way nothing else did. The Matillian law, written sometime in the last 200 years, regulated the entire practice of fulling, specifying methods, materials, and professional standards for the Guild of Fullons across the empire. You step down into the basin. The liquid reaches your ankles. The cloth beneath your feet is heavy, a wool toga belonging to a client whose name you do not know, dropped off yesterday afternoon by a household slave who waited in the entrance while Stephanus inspected the garment and recorded the transaction. A toga is not a simple piece of clothing. A toga praetexta, the kind worn by magistrates and senior officials, requires 10 or more feet of wool fabric arranged in a specific draped configuration that takes practice to achieve. A white toga, meant for a formal occasion, must be returned not merely clean but bright, almost luminous, the kind of white that announces wealth and citizenship and social standing to anyone who passes on the street. You begin to tramp. This is the word for it, trampling. You place both hands on the low walls of the stall on either side of you, grip the stone, and begin to walk in place, lifting your feet high, bringing them down firmly, working the cloth against the basin floor in a rhythmic pressing motion. The ammonia in the solution rises faintly through the air. You breathe through your mouth for the first few minutes, as you do every morning, while your body adjusts to the smell. The motion is simple. It does not require thought. This is both its mercy and its punishment, that the work leaves your mind entirely free, with nothing to fill it but the things you brought with you from Macedonia, the things you have collected in 4 years in this city, and the specific shape of whatever today is going to require. Across the courtyard, Drusus has taken his position in the rinsing basin. The rinsing basin is different from the treading stalls. It is a large, flat, rectangular pool in the center of the atrium, fed by the continuous flow from the water pipe. Cloth that has been worked in the treading stalls is brought here to be rinsed, first wrung out by hand, which takes significant upper body strength, and then submerged in fresh water and pressed repeatedly against the basin walls to push the chemical solution out of the fibers. Drusus does this work with the practiced economy of someone who has been doing it for years before you arrived. He does not speak in the mornings. He communicates through gesture, through the angle of his body, through the direction of his gaze. You have learned to read him the way you learned to read the basins, gradually and then all at once. Philemon is not yet in position. You hear him moving in the sleeping room, the soft scrape of feet on stone, the sound of water poured into a clay cup. Stephanus has not arrived yet either. Stephanus lives in the front section of the building, in rooms that still retain the decoration of the original house. Painted walls, a proper sleeping chamber, a small household shrine called a lararium, where he burns incense to the lares, the household gods who protect his business and his family. You have walked past that shrine many times. The lares stand painted on the plaster in their short tunics, a serpent coiling at their feet, garlands around their necks. They are not your gods. You had your own gods in Macedonia, gods whose names you still remember, even though their language is slipping from you, year by year, the way a shoreline erodes. You tramp the toga for 40 minutes without stopping. This is the first stage of the process, and it is the one that determines everything that comes after. If the cloth is not worked thoroughly enough in the alkaline solution, the grease in the fibers will not dissolve, and the rinsing and drying and pressing that follow will produce a garment that looks clean from a distance and tells the truth up close. Stephanus will inspect the finished work himself. If he finds a problem, a stubborn stain, a fiber that has felted incorrectly, a garment returned to the wrong client, there are consequences. They are not usually violent. They are usually the kind of consequences that involve loss of the small privileges that make this life bearable. The half cup of posca, the sour wine and water mixture that is distributed at midday, the hour in the late afternoon when the work slows and you are allowed to sit in the courtyard without being directed to do something. You have not made a serious error in 2 years. This is not because you are afraid, though fear is present. It is because you are good at this. Your hands know the cloth. Your feet know the pressure. There is a kind of knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind. And after 4 years in this building, you have developed it completely. You can feel when a toga has been worked enough. You can feel when the fibers are starting to release their oils, the subtle change in the resistance of the cloth underfoot, the way the basin liquid shifts from cloudy to slightly less cloudy over the course of the process. This knowledge belongs to you. The toga does not, the basin does not, the building does not, the water moving through the pipes does not, your labor does not, but the knowledge lives in your body and cannot be inventoried by Stephanus or listed in any ledger. The city outside begins to wake around you. The Via dell'Abbondanza is one of Pompeii's main east-west arteries, running from the central forum all the way to the eastern edge of the city near the amphitheater. On a summer morning, traffic begins early. You can hear it through the stone walls of the fullonica, the rattle of iron-rimmed cartwheels on the paving stones, the raised voices of merchants preparing their stalls, the particular sharp clatter of amphorae being shifted in the shop next door. The thermopolium, the fast food counter that operates in the building directly adjacent to the fullonica, will open its shutters within the hour, and by mid-morning its counter will have a small cluster of customers eating from the terracotta vessels set into the stone surface. You have eaten from that counter exactly once, on a festival day when Stephanus permitted you to leave the building. You have been outside the fullonica on perhaps a dozen occasions in 4 years, not because you are chained. The archaeologists who excavate this building centuries from now will find no chains, no locks on the sleeping rooms, no iron fetters fixed to the walls. The control is not physical, it is structural. Where would you go? You do not speak Latin well enough to pass as a freedman. Your face and your accent mark you. The city has a mechanism for returned runaways that involves a hot iron and a punishment that makes the work in the treading stalls feel like an afternoon in the garden. Stephanus does not need locks. Rome does not need locks. The system is the lock. You lift the toga from the basin. It is heavier than it looks, wet wool being one of the densest materials you handle regularly. You carry it to the rinsing pool and transfer it to Drusus, who takes it without ceremony and begins to work it through the fresh water. This transfer happens dozens of times a day. You and Drusus have developed a rhythm for it that requires no words and almost no eye contact. A lifting, a shift of weight, a brief moment where both your hands are on the same piece of cloth, and then it is his and you are already turning back toward the treading stall. Philemon appears at the door of the sleeping room. He is small for 15, or however old he is, since his age is an estimate, with the narrow shoulders of a child and the wary eyes of someone who has already learned that the world does not automatically mean him well. He was purchased from a different dealer than you were, from a lot that came through the port at Naples rather than Puteoli. And the circumstances of his enslavement are something he has not explained in the 6 months you have shared a sleeping room. You have not asked. In this place, a man's story is his own, and the only privacy available is the privacy of the thing that happened before. He nods at you. You nod back. He takes his position at the second treading stall. The morning has, in this way, begun. Outside, on the Via dell'Abbondanza, a cart of amphorae rolls past, heading east. The driver shouts something at a pedestrian. The pedestrian shouts back. There is a brief negotiation of the kind that happens 100 times a day on this road. Bodies and wheels and animals all finding their way through the same narrow stone channel. And then the sound fades and the street settles back into its morning frequency. Inside the fullonica, there is the sound of water. Wet cloth worked against stone, feet on basins. The periodic creak of the upper floor as Stephanus moves through his rooms. You pick up the next garment from the pile waiting at the edge of the treading stall. It is a wool tunic, expensive. The weave is fine and regular, the kind produced on high-quality looms, probably imported from one of the textile-producing regions in the north. There is a stain near the lower hem that you identify without much thought as wine mixed with something thicker. The Pompeians eat well. The evidence for this is everywhere in the archaeological record that will eventually be uncovered. The seeds of figs and almonds and pomegranates found in the city's soil, the fish bones, the traces of garum, the fermented fish sauce that flavors everything in Roman cooking, the carbonized loaves of bread preserved in bakeries by the very catastrophe that destroys the city. The people who bring their clothes to the fullonica are people who eat at dinner parties where the stains are evidence of abundance. You lower the tunic into the basin. You have never been to a dinner party. You step down and begin. The rhythm of the work is steady. It asks for consistency rather than speed. Too fast and the cloth is damaged. Too slow, and the queue of garments waiting at the side of the stall backs up into the late afternoon, and Stephanus begins to appear in the courtyard doorway at intervals that tell you something without saying anything. You have calibrated your pace over 4 years. It is the pace of someone who understands that this is a long day that will be followed by another long day, and the body is the only instrument you have, and instruments that are broken cannot work. The sun is up now. You can tell not by looking at it, the walls of the fullonica block most direct light in the morning, but by the change in the quality of the sound from the street. Pompeii, like all Roman cities, has specific times when certain activities are permitted. Heavy wheeled traffic, carts, wagons, is banned from the city's streets during daylight hours to prevent the gridlock that plagued every Roman city without this rule. The morning cart traffic that you heard earlier, the iron wheels on stone, will have thinned now as drivers pull their vehicles off the main roads and wait out the day hours at the city's edges or in the large yards maintained near the gates. The streets fill instead with feet, with the sandals of merchants, and the bare feet of slaves, and the heavy boots of tradesmen, and the soft shoes of the women who come out to shop at the market stalls near the forum, with the sound of voices conducting the city's business, the negotiation of prices, the exchange of social information, the specific verbal currency of civic life in a prosperous Roman town. You tramp the tunic, you wring it, you carry it to Drusus. Stephanus appears in the doorway of the interior rooms. He is a man in his middle 40s, heavy-set in the way of men who work indoors and eat regularly, with a face that history has not seen fit to record in stone or fresco, but that you know in the way you know any face that appears in your peripheral vision many times a day. He stands in the doorway for a moment, taking in the courtyard, assessing. His gaze passes over the treading stalls, the rinsing basin, the queue of garments waiting. He nods slightly, an accountant's nod, confirming that the morning's inventory matches expectations, and then he disappears back into the interior. This is his morning inspection. It happens every day. You do not look at him directly while he is looking. This is not a rule anyone has stated. It is a practice that exists between the two of you as a kind of unspoken grammar, a set of conventions that govern how a master and a slave occupy the same space without the constant friction of acknowledged hierarchy. Eye contact is assertion. Averted eyes are the language of accommodation. You have become fluent in it without choosing to be. By the middle of the morning, you have processed 7 garments. A toga praetexta for a magistrate's household. You know the household by the mark embroidered into the hem, a small symbol that Stephanus noted in the ledger when the garment was received. 2 lengths of wool fabric that arrived undyed from a weaving workshop and need to have the lanolin worked out of them before they can go to a dyer. 3 tunics of varying quality. 1 woman's stola, a long garment worn over the tunic, which requires slightly different handling because the fabric is lighter and more prone to felting if the pressure is too strong. Each garment is different. Each requires small adjustments in pressure, in duration, in the temperature of the rinse water. This is the knowledge that lives in your hands. Between garments, you drink from a clay cup of water that Philemon keeps refilled from the rinsing basin's overflow channel. The water is not clean in the way that water from the street fountains is clean, but it is cool and it exists, and in this heat, existence is sufficient. You allow yourself, briefly, to think about Macedonia. Not the village. You do not think about the village if you can avoid it. You think instead about the smell of a particular hillside in autumn, the specific quality of light on the mountains there, something with no Roman equivalent and no Latin word. You hold it for a moment, the way you hold the garments before releasing them into the basin, firmly, aware that you are going to have to let go. Then you pick up the next piece of cloth. The stain at the hem of the linen tunic you are holding now is not wine. You recognize it as fish sauce, garum, or something close to it, that specific dark, fermented signature that gets into fiber and resists everything except the alkaline solution and significant trampling. You lower the garment into the basin. You feel the resistance of wet linen against your feet. You begin. This is the morning of the 79th year. Outside, the mountain is quiet. The city does not know. And in the fullonica on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the work continues, as it does every morning, as it will continue tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, for as long as this city stands on its soil and the people who live in it need their clothes to be clean. By midday, the fullonica smells differently than it does in the morning. In the morning, the smell is cold, alkaline, sharp, cut through with the ammonia from the overnight urine that sits in the basins waiting for the day's work to begin. By midday, the smell has been warmed. The sun, which now clears the walls and falls directly into the open courtyard, has turned the moisture in the air into something you can almost see. The chemical vapor from the treading stalls rises in a way that catches the light. The wet cloth in the rinsing pool steams faintly. Everything you touch is damp. Everything the air contains is the fullonica, translated into something you breathe rather than merely smell. You have trampled cloth for 4 hours without stopping, except for the brief intervals between garments. Your feet know the basin floor the way they will never know any other surface. You know every crack in the stone, every slightly raised edge where the mortar has shifted slightly from years of immersion. You know the specific resistance of different fabrics, the heavy drag of wet wool, the lighter submission of linen, the awkward stiffness of a newly finished length of undyed cloth, still carrying its full weight of lanolin from the sheep. You know how the temperature of the solution changes over the course of a session, how the first garments of the morning go into cooler liquid and the later ones into something warmer, which affects the rate at which the fibers release their oils and therefore affects the duration of the trampling required. None of this is written down anywhere. None of it has been taught to you formally. It lives in your feet and hands, transmitted not from master to student, but from your own body to itself, accumulated over 4 years of repetition without explanation. Drusus surfaces from the rinsing basin, straightens his back with the particular caution of a man whose spine has registered an objection, and looks at the queue of processed garments waiting to be carried to the upper terrace. The upper terrace is accessed by the narrow stair at the back of the building. It was, when this structure was a private home, a sleeping area, or a storage loft. Stephanus converted it by adding a railing and installing the wooden frameworks called viminia cavea, structures woven from withes and branches resembling large, flat baskets, over which wet cloth is draped to dry in the sun and wind. The upper terrace of the fullonica of Stephanus is, at any given point during working hours, covered in garments. White togas spread flat, tunics hung over the edges of the frames, lengths of cloth pinned against the wooden supports with the small weights that hold fabric taut during drying. From the street below, the terrace is visible to anyone who looks up. It is a kind of advertisement. The cloth up there tells the city that the fullonica is working, that garments are moving through the process, that Stephanus's establishment is alive and producing. You are not up there, you are down here. Drusus gathers an armload of processed cloth from the rinsing basin's draining surface and carries it toward the stair. This is his circuit, rinsing pool to terrace, terrace to wherever Stephanus has directed the next stage of processing, back to the rinsing pool. He has walked this circuit more times than either of you could count. The soles of his feet on the stone stair have polished a slight depression in the second step from the bottom, a groove barely wider than a thumb but measurable, the kind of mark that bodies make on stone when they pass over the same point 10,000 times. You change basins. Each treading stall is used for a period of time and then allowed to rest while a different stall is worked. The solution degrades as it is used. The ammonia concentration drops. The dissolved grease content rises. The effectiveness diminishes. Stephanus refreshes the basins with new urine at intervals through the week. The urine collection is ongoing. The clay vessels set into the pavement outside the building are emptied by Philemon each morning before the first garments go in. The collected liquid carried through the entrance in a large clay pot and added to the basins. Philemon carried 3 pots this morning. This is not the worst job in the fullonica, though it is not, by any measure, a good one. The stall you move to now is the one that received the overnight urine collection, fresher solution, higher ammonia, appropriate for the heavier and more stained garments that have been accumulating in the queue since you began this morning. You review the pile, a dark wool cloak that belongs to someone wealthy, the quality of the weave and the residual traces of a deep saffron dye that has faded but not entirely gone tell you this is a garment that has been expensive and is being maintained at cost. A toga that Stephanus flagged in the morning ledger as belonging to a client who complained about the last wash. 2 lengths of natural wool that have come from the weaving workshops along the northern edge of the city. You take the cloak first. Wool cloaks require sustained pressure and careful attention to the direction of the fibers. If the trampling is applied in an inconsistent direction, if you work the cloth at different angles without following the weave, the fibers begin to mat against each other in a process called felting, which produces a surface that is dense and uniform but that permanently alters the texture of the fabric. Some felting is intentional. The Romans produced felted wool garments for specific purposes, including military uses. But a client's expensive cloak that arrives back from the fullonica felted in a way it was not felted before is a complaint waiting to happen, and Stephanus takes complaints seriously, which means you take them seriously. You work the cloak with care. The ammonia reaches your sinuses and then retreats, the way it always does after the first minutes. The city hums outside the walls. A voice passes on the Via dell'Abbondanza, someone calling a name, not in distress but in the ordinary volume of a street conversation, and then the voice is gone. Stephanus reappears in the courtyard just before the midday break. He carries with him the morning's accounts, a wax tablet with the ledger of garments received, fees agreed, expected completion dates. He reviews this against the queue of work remaining and makes a sound, not quite a word, more the sound of a man confirming to himself that things are approximately where they should be. And then he calls Philemon over to speak with him. You cannot hear the conversation clearly from the treading stall, but you read its structure from the angle of the 2 bodies. An instruction is given, received, nodded to. Philemon crosses to the storage area at the side of the building where the Simolean earth is kept. Simolean earth is a white clay imported from the island of Kymlos in the Aegean, and it is one of the primary brightening agents used in the fulling process. After a white wool garment has been rinsed and partially dried, Simolean earth is worked into the fibers by hand and then allowed to sit, drawing out any remaining discoloration and leaving the surface of the cloth with a luminous whiteness that is specifically what Pompeii's upper classes are paying for. This is the process that makes the togas on the Via dell'Abbondanza bright enough to announce status from across the street. That whiteness is this building. That whiteness is your feet and your hands and 4 years of accumulated knowledge. Philemon brings the clay to the upper terrace. You tramp the cloak. At midday, Stephanus permits the work to stop. This is the Roman institution of the midday rest, the equivalent of what later Mediterranean cultures will call the siesta, a recognition that the summer heat in Campania makes sustained physical labor dangerous in the middle hours of the day. Even slaves in Pompeii receive this pause. It is not generosity. It is the practical calculation of a man who needs his workers functional in the afternoon. You receive your midday ration from a clay vessel that Stephanus has left near the rinsing basin. The ration is posca, water mixed with sour wine, the low-grade vinegar-adjacent beverage that is the standard hydration for laborers across the empire. It is not pleasant. It is cold from the storage room where Stephanus keeps the amphorae, and in this heat, cold matters more than pleasant. With it there is bread, a round flat loaf made from wheat, dense and slightly bitter from the coarse milling, the kind of bread that represents the base of almost every working-class diet in the Roman world. Sometimes there is also a small portion of garum for dipping, or olives or dried figs. Today there are olives. You count them without meaning to. There are 7. You sit in the shade at the edge of the courtyard. Drusus sits beside you, not close enough to be conspicuous about it, but close enough that you are both aware of the proximity. Philemon sits separately, slightly apart, eating with the focused attention of a boy who grew up uncertain whether there would be enough. The courtyard in the heat of midday is very quiet. Pompeii operates in a rhythm that the heat imposes on it, active in the morning, slower at midday, resuming in the late afternoon and extending into the evening in the taverns and thermopolia that stay open after dark. The streets outside have thinned, the voices are fewer. In the thermopolium next door, the sound of the morning rush has settled into the quieter ambient of the slow hours. 1 or 2 customers, a muted exchange, the particular silence of a business that is open but not busy. Drusus speaks for the first time today. He speaks Greek, as he always does with you, the Doric-inflected Greek of a man who grew up in a region you do not recognize from any place name he has used. His Greek is different from yours, different rhythm, different vowels, but comprehensible, the way that all the regional variations of a language are comprehensible once you have listened long enough. In this building, Greek is a private language. Stephanus knows perhaps 20 words of it. Philemon is learning it from the 2 of you, slowly adding a word a week. Drusus says, the toga in the second stack has a damage in the weave near the left hem. You say, from the trampling? He says, from before. It arrived that way. I want Stephanus to know before it goes back, or the client will say it was us. This is a specific kind of intelligence. Drusus has been in this building for 11 years. 4 years longer than the current Stephanus ownership, which means he passed from a previous owner to Stephanus through some transaction you have never heard the full account of. 11 years in a fullonica gives a man a thorough understanding of which troubles are worth anticipating and which can be allowed to arrive on their own. A damaged garment returned to a client without explanation is a complaint. A damaged garment flagged before return is a demonstration of quality control. The distinction matters. You nod. You will tell Stephanus yourself, because your Latin is better than Drusus's, and because navigating this kind of communication is something you have learned to do with a specific combination of directness and deference that produces the correct outcome. You have watched how Stephanus responds to different framings of the same information. He responds well to precision. He responds poorly to uncertainty. You will tell him what the garment looks like, and where the damage is, and when it appears to have occurred, and he will make a note in the ledger, and when the client comes to collect, the conversation will go differently than it would have if no one had said anything. This is how you are useful. Not just the trampling. Any reasonably healthy young man can tramp cloth. You are useful because you understand the difference between information that protects the business and information that endangers it, and you know how to deliver the former in a language that Stephanus can use. This is the skill that in a different world would have a value beyond what can be entered in a ledger. Here, it makes you a more expensive line in an account. You drink the rest of your pasca. The heat in the courtyard is substantial. The paving stones of the garden area, which once held flower beds and decorative plantings when this was a private home, now hold the stone basins and drying frames and racks of the working fullonica, and they radiate the stored heat of the morning sun in a way that makes the air above them shimmer slightly at this hour. You have been sitting in this courtyard long enough to read the movements of the shadow from the wall on the east side, which tells you the time as precisely as any sundial. The shadow's angle tells you there is perhaps an hour of midday rest remaining. You think about the damaged toga. You think about the client's name, which is recorded in the ledger, and what you know about the household, which is very little, only that the symbol embroidered into the hem matches a marking Stephanus has pointed out before as belonging to a family connected to the administration of the theater. You think about the explanation you will give Stephanus and the exact Latin words you will use, words that place the blame correctly in the past, before arrival, without making the client sound careless, which would imply that the fullonica accepted a damaged garment without noting it, which is also a problem. These calculations are not difficult. They are the ordinary cognitive work of someone who has learned to navigate a situation with fewer legal rights than the garment you are holding. When the hour has passed, Stephanus appears in the courtyard doorway. He looks at you. He looks at the work remaining. He says one word: enough. This is the signal that the rest is over. You rise and return to the treading stall. The afternoon work is different from the morning in a way that is not about the tasks, but about the body. In the morning, the body has had the night to recover, and the first hours carry a kind of residual energy that is not quite freshness, but at least approximates it. In the afternoon, after hours of trampling and the brief flattening of the midday rest, the body is working from a different account. The feet are aware of the stone in a way they were not at dawn. The hands that grip the stall walls have a dull ache in the tendons between the knuckles. The back, which bears the weight of the bent forward posture required when reaching down into the basin, has its own opinion about the afternoon. You tramp. You ring. You carry. You speak briefly with Stephanus about the damaged toga, using the words you prepared at midday, and his response is as predicted. He picks up the wax tablet, makes a notation, and says that he will address it with the client. He does not thank you. In the grammar of this relationship, information you provide that is useful to him is simply your function, not a contribution that requires acknowledgement. You have known this for 4 years, and you have long since stopped waiting for a different grammar. The afternoon queue includes several garments that require the later stages of the fulling process rather than the initial treading, cloth that has already been washed in previous days and is now ready for the simoleon earth treatment, or for carding with the thistle heads, stiff dried flower heads of the fuller's teasel plant, Dipsacus fullanum, used to raise the surface nap of the fabric after washing and drying. The teasel work is done on the terrace. You carry the first batch of dried cloth up the narrow stair. The terrace, in the afternoon sun, is the brightest and hottest part of the building. The cloth draped over the Vimigna cave frameworks catches the light and turns it. The togas spread on the frames are, in this light, almost white enough to hurt to look at directly. The white is not accidental. It is the result of multiple chemical stages: the alkaline washing, the Simoleon earth treatment, and in some cases the sulfur fumigation, a process by which white cloth is draped over a small enclosed frame beneath which sulfur is burned. The sulfur vapor bleaches the fibers to a whiteness that wool cannot achieve by any other method. The smell of sulfur fumigation is distinct from the smell of the basins, sharper, drier, with an edge that you feel in the back of the throat rather than the nostrils. You take a teasel head from the bin at the corner of the terrace. The teasel is a plant that grows across the Mediterranean, a tall, stiff-stemmed thing with a dense, elongated flower head covered in hooked bracts, small curved projections that catch and grip fabric fibers when the head is drawn across them. The Romans called it carduus, and its function in the fulling process is to raise the surface of dried, washed wool into a consistent nap, smoothing the texture and producing the even surface that indicates quality. You draw the teasel across the first length of cloth. The motion is careful. Short strokes in the direction of the weave, consistent pressure, attention to the evenness of the nap as it rises. The cloth is a length of finished white wool, probably destined to become a garment after the owner has it dyed or altered. Under your hands, its surface changes in a way that you can feel more than see, the fibers organizing themselves into alignment, the texture settling from the slight roughness of dried processed cloth into something softer and more regular. From the terrace you can see part of the Via dell'Abbondanza. The street in the afternoon light is active again, the midday thinning reversed as the city resumes its operations. There is a man standing outside the thermopolium next door, eating from a ceramic vessel with both hands, a working man, his tunic dusty, probably a laborer from one of the construction projects that are always ongoing somewhere in Pompeii's perpetually renovating building stock. There are two women in conversation near the fountain at the corner, their conversation at a volume that crosses the street. There is a cart, legitimately on the road now that the late afternoon permitted hour has returned, carrying what looks like building materials toward the eastern part of the city. You watch for a moment. Then you return to the cloth. You watch for a moment, and then you return to the cloth. This is the balance you have learned to maintain. Enough awareness of the world beyond this building to remain a human being, and enough discipline to return to the work that is your survival. The world beyond the building is not yours. The cloth in your hands, briefly, is. The sun is moving toward the western edge of the sky. The shadows in the fullonica's courtyard have lengthened across the stone in a way that means perhaps 2 hours of working light remain. In those 2 hours, you will finish the teasel work on the cloth at the terrace, carry it down, assist Drusus in folding and stacking the garments that are ready for the screw press, and begin the process of closing down the basins for the evening, draining the solutions that need to be refreshed, rinsing the treading stalls, covering the basins with the wooden boards that keep the overnight urine collection protected from evaporation and insects. The screw press is in the back room adjacent to the rinsing pool. It is a substantial piece of equipment. 2 flat boards held between upright beams, tightened against each other by a large threaded wooden screw turned by a lever. Garments placed between the boards and compressed under the press emerge flattened, smooth, and slightly shiny, the effect that wealthy clients understand as the mark of quality finishing. The press at the fullonica of Stephanus was found by archaeologists in excavations centuries from now, along with its operating mechanism, preserved by the same catastrophe that preserved everything else in this city. Drusus operates the press. He has been doing it long enough that the specific torque of the screw's thread is knowledge that lives in his wrists. He knows how much force is required for wool versus linen, how long to hold compression for a heavy toga versus a lighter tunic when the boards have reached the correct pressure without needing to assess it through any means other than the resistance he feels in the lever. You bring the garments to him in order. The toga praetexta that came in this morning goes first. It has been through the full process now, trampled in alkaline solution, rinsed, dried on the terrace, treated with simoleon earth, dried again, lightly teaseled. What was a heavy and stained formal garment when it arrived this morning is now, as Drusus feeds it carefully into the press, a white wool toga that has the specific quality of cleanliness that this city considers worth paying for. Drusus tightens the screw. You watch the fabric compress between the boards, watched as you have watched it hundreds of times, and there is something in this part of the process that catches your attention even after all this time. Not wonder exactly, but recognition. The transformation is real. The garment that went into the basin this morning was carrying the evidence of someone else's life, the stain of their dinner, the oils of their skin, the residue of wherever they wore it and whatever they did in it. Now it is blank again, returned to its raw state, ready to carry the next set of evidence. You are the reason it is blank. You are invisible in it. The client who picks up this toga tomorrow morning will not see you in the whiteness. They will see only their toga returned. This is how the work is structured. This is how Rome is structured. The labor that produces the clean surface is buried in the surface itself, present and invisible simultaneously. Drusus releases the screw. The toga is done. You carry it to the folding area near the entrance where Stephanus will inspect it in the morning before it goes back to its owner. You fold it with the particular care that expensive wool requires. The fibers have been pressed flat and will show the crease marks of improper folding for a long time. The fold is specific, following the toga's drape lines, matching the geometry of how it will be worn. You have folded togas so many times that your hands know the configuration without thought. You place it on the pile. The day is ending. The light in the courtyard is warm and horizontal, the specific quality of late afternoon in Campania that painters and poets notice and laundry workers simply know as the light that means the work is almost over. The shadow from the east wall has crossed 3/4 of the courtyard floor. In the street outside, the character of the sound has shifted again. Fewer commercial voices, more social ones, the particular frequency of a city moving from work into evening. You begin the closing work. The basins need to be assessed, which solutions can be left overnight, which need to be drained and refreshed in the morning. This is a judgment Drusus makes, and you execute. He walks the row of treading stalls, bending to peer into each basin, running a finger across the surface of the liquid and examining the result, and he communicates his verdict for each stall with a gesture that you have both long since agreed on. A flat hand means leave it. A palm down pressing motion means drain. You drain 3 of the 6 stalls, carrying the used solution in buckets through a channel at the back of the courtyard that connects to the city's drainage system beneath the street. Pompeii has functioning sewers. This is not a minor detail. The city's drainage system, a network of stone channels beneath the paved streets, connected to the public fountains and the larger buildings through specific outlet points, is one of the civic infrastructure achievements that makes it possible to run an industrial laundry in the middle of a residential and commercial district. The waste liquid from the fulling process, which contains dissolved organic material, residual alkaline chemicals, and water, exits the building through this channel and joins the larger flow that moves beneath the Via dell'Abbondanza toward the city's edge. You drain the basins without thinking much about it. You have done it hundreds of times. Philemon sweeps the courtyard floor. He does this every evening with a broom made of bundled sorghum stems, the standard household broom of the Roman world, working methodically from the back wall toward the entrance in a way that collects the debris of the day's work. Wool fibers, clay dust from the Somalian earth, small threads and lint shed from the processed garments, the occasional dropped tool or broken fragment of clay vessel. The floor of the fullonica is stone, and it holds the evidence of the day's work in a layer of fine material that Philemon's broom lifts and guides toward the entrance. You cover the remaining basins with their wooden boards. You carry the teasel heads back to their storage bin. You collect the empty clay vessels from the treading stalls and stack them near the entrance for the morning. The day is not quite done, but it is doing. Stephanos appears one final time to conduct his evening review. He checks the folded garments. He checks the ledger. He checks the state of the basins. He says 3 words that function as dismissal, and you and Drusus and Philemon return to the sleeping room. The sleeping room in the early evening holds the day's warmth. The stone walls have absorbed the heat of the summer afternoon and release it slowly, so that the small room is warmer than the courtyard for an hour or 2 after sunset, before the temperature begins to drop. You lie on the rope bed. The wool scrap mattress releases the smell of old processing, which is the smell of this building and therefore the smell of your life. Drusus is on his side immediately, facing the wall, the posture of a man who has learned to close the day quickly. Philemon sits on his bed for a moment, holding his knees, looking at nothing in particular. You have noticed, over the 6 months since he arrived, that Philemon does this every evening. He sits and looks at nothing for between 5 and 15 minutes, and then he lies down and either sleeps or does not sleep, but stays still either way. His gaze goes somewhere you cannot follow. You do not ask. You understand it as the practice of someone who has not yet found the particular equilibrium that long captivity teaches, the way of filing the day away so that it does not accumulate into something that prevents you from functioning tomorrow. You will find it, eventually. Or you will not, and something else will happen, and there is no point in thinking about that. You close your eyes. Outside, on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the city is settling into its evening shape. The thermopolium next door will stay open for another hour or 2, its counter lit by oil lamps, serving the people who eat their dinners from counters rather than dining rooms. The taverns further along the street will be louder as the night deepens. Somewhere in the city, at a dinner party in a house with a painted triclinium, someone is wearing a toga that smells of simoleon earth and sulfur and the particular clean of a morning's work. They do not think about where the clean came from. You lie in the dark. The mountain above the city is quiet tonight, as it has been quiet for as long as anyone in Pompeii can remember. The vines on its slopes hold the summer heat in their fruit. The soil around the city's edge is dark and rich from centuries of eruption so long past that no living person remembers it or knows what it means. Tomorrow the work will begin again before the first light. Tomorrow the queue of garments will be different in its particulars and the same in its structure. Tomorrow the basins will be full, and the urine will be collected, and the city will bring its dirty clothes to the door, and you will make them clean. Tonight there is only the cooling room and the sounds of two other men sleeping, and the distant music of a city that is going to be here for a long time yet. You do not know otherwise. You breathe. You let the day go. The room gets darker as the oil lamp in the corridor gutters and drops. Outside, the stars above Pompeii are extraordinary tonight, the kind of sky that a city buried in volcanic ash will never see again, because the cities that come after are lit in ways that push the stars back. But you do not know that. You know only the specific darkness of this room, this city, this August, this life. The weight of the day lifts in small increments. The last thing you are aware of before sleep arrives is the sound of the water still moving through the pipes beneath the fullonica, a faint, continuous sound. The city's water supply maintaining its pressure through the night, the aqueduct running from Misenum through the distribution tower and into the network of pipes beneath the streets, running as it will run tomorrow and the day after, and through every night of this summer, and the summer to come, or almost the summer to come. The water runs. The mountain is quiet. You sleep. The morning after the damaged toga is resolved, Stephanos gives you an errand. This is unusual enough that you register it without expression, which is the correct response. Expression in this building costs more than it earns. You register it internally, in the part of you that still tracks the small variations in what is permitted and what is not. The part that has been monitoring that boundary for 4 years with the continuous low-level attention of someone who understands that the boundary can move in either direction without notice. The errand is this. A client on the far side of the forum has sent a message requesting that 2 completed garments be delivered directly to his household rather than collected at the fullonica. This is a service that Stephanos provides to his better clients, the ones whose accounts are settled promptly and whose garments represent the higher end of the work coming through the basins. The client's name is in the ledger. The garments are folded and wrapped in a length of undyed linen for transport. Stephanos hands you the bundle and says the address, which you repeat back to him to confirm, and then he says one additional thing. He says, "Be back by the 2nd hour past midday." This is the boundary. You nod. You walk out of the fullonica onto the Via dell'Abbondanza. The street hits you the way it always does on the rare occasions when you step out of the building, as an excess of sensation. After the contained, chemical, dim interior of the fullonica, the street is loud and bright and wide, and filled with the movement of people who are going somewhere of their own choosing. The paving stones of the Via dell'Abbondanza are large, irregular limestone blocks worn smooth in the center by generations of foot traffic and cartwheels. The surface is not flat. There is a slight crown to it, designed to channel rainwater toward the edges, and the stepping stones at the intersections are raised above road level to allow pedestrians to cross without descending into the gutter channel that runs along the curb. You walk east. The bundle of garments is under your arm, wrapped in linen, secured with a cord. It is not heavy. It is the kind of weight that would be nothing after a morning of wet wool. But you are not carrying it after a morning of wet wool. You are carrying it at the start of the working day, on a morning when the heat has not yet fully established itself, and the city around you is still in its earlier, more manageable frequency. The Via dell'Abbondanza is Pompeii's main east-west artery. You have walked parts of it before, the segment immediately adjacent to the fullonica, the stretch to the nearest public fountain, the brief excursion on the festival day 2 years ago when Stephanos permitted you an hour at the Thermopolium. But you have not walked it all the way to the Forum, and the Forum is where this errand takes you, or close enough to it that you will pass through the eastern edge of Pompeii's civic center on your way to the client's house. The street on both sides is active commerce. On your left, a bakery, the large commercial kind, with its own millstones powered by donkeys who walk in circles in the back room, their eyes covered to prevent dizziness, their hooves wearing slow channels into the floor. You can smell the bread from outside, that specific warm grain smell that is one of the few pleasant smells Pompeii produces in quantity. There are at least 12 bakeries in this city at the time you are walking through it. Bread is the foundation of the Roman diet at every social level, and the commercial bakeries serve not just customers who come to buy, but also the grain dole system that distributes bread to the poor through the city's administrative structures. On your right, a cloth merchant, bolts of fabric displayed at the front of the stall, the proprietor visible just inside the threshold in conversation with a customer whose back you see. The fabrics are dyed. You register them as you walk past. A deep red that is likely Tyrian purple imitation, achieved with murex shellfish dye from the eastern Mediterranean. A yellow that is saffron or a less expensive substitute. A blue-gray that is woad. The colors are expensive to varying degrees. The red, if it is genuine purple, represents a cost so significant that it is effectively restricted to people with money to demonstrate. The toga's purple border that marks a senator or magistrate costs more than your purchase price. You do not stop to look. You keep moving with the pace of someone who has a destination and a time limit, and understands both precisely. But the city deposits things in you as you pass through it, whether you intend to collect them or not. The smell of the bakery follows you half a block. The sound of a disagreement between two men at a stall, something about the price of a jar, the clipped, tight-voweled Latin of men who are angry about money, fades as you move past it. A woman carrying a ceramic water jug on her head, with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times, does not look at you and you do not look at her. A child, free by the look of the tunic, someone's household child out on an errand, runs past you heading the other direction, with the heedless velocity of someone who has not yet learned to regulate speed against social context. This city contains approximately 11,000 to 20,000 people depending on the season. You are one of them and not one of them simultaneously. You walk through it like water walking through a hand, present, temporarily held, and then released. The street narrows briefly where a building has been partially rebuilt. There is ongoing construction in Pompeii, perpetual and unremarkable, the consequence of the earthquake that struck this region 16 years ago in the 62nd year of the Common Era. That earthquake was significant. It damaged buildings across the city, collapsed walls, disrupted the water supply temporarily, and sent residents fleeing into the streets. Some of the damage was repaired within years. Some of it is still being repaired now, in the 79th year, because the scale of the destruction was large and the resources required to address it are finite. Pompeii in this moment is a city still stitching itself back together. You pass the construction site without slowing. The workers there, some of them slaves, some of them free laborers paid by the day, do not look at you and you do not look at them. The social grammar of not looking operates everywhere in this city. not only in the fullonica. It is the grammar of strangers in a Roman street, of people who are technically in the same public space but not in the same social category, of individuals who have learned that eye contact is a commitment of a kind that must be chosen carefully. You turn north at the crossroads that leads toward the Forum. The Forum of Pompeii is the political, religious, and commercial heart of the city. It is a large rectangular open space, approximately 38 meters wide and 142 meters long, paved in travertine, a pale limestone quarried from the region around Rome, and surrounded on three sides by colonnaded porticos. The fourth side, to the north, is dominated by the Temple of Jupiter, the largest and most important religious structure in the city, its facade facing down the length of the Forum space in a way that is designed to make anyone approaching it feel the weight of the divine and civic authority it represents. You do not enter the Forum itself. Your errand takes you along its eastern edge, past the Umachia building, the large cloth market and guild hall that the Pompeian Fullers' Guild dedicated to the woman whose name it bears, whose statue stands inside in a niche at the back of the building, near a larger statue of the Emperor Tiberius. The building is named after Umachia, a wealthy Pompeian woman who financed its construction in the early decades of this century, and its connection to the Fullers' Guild, the professional association of which Stephanus's fullonica is nominally a part, is visible in the dedication inscription above the entrance. You pause for a moment outside the entrance to the Umachia building. Not long. You do not have time for long pauses, but long enough to look through the entrance at the interior, which you have never entered, and to register what you are seeing: the courtyard, the colonnades, the niche with the statue, the particular quality of an important building in a prosperous Roman city. The statue of Umachia inside is approximately life-sized, rendered in marble, depicted in the formal drapery of a woman of standing. She was real. She was wealthy. She financed this building from her own funds, which places her in a category of women whose economic power in Roman society exceeds what the formal legal structure permits women to hold directly. Roman women cannot vote, they cannot hold political office, but a woman with sufficient wealth can dedicate a building to the city and have her name on the inscription above the door for as long as the building stands. You are looking at her statue through an entrance you are not going to walk through. You move on. The client's house is in the neighborhood north of the Forum, in the part of the city where the houses are larger and the streets slightly quieter. The house you are looking for is identifiable by the electoral inscription painted on its exterior wall, a painted announcement in red and black text, one of the hundreds that cover the facades of buildings throughout Pompeii, endorsing a candidate for one of the city's elected offices. These painted inscriptions are produced by professional sign painters hired by political campaigns, and they cover available wall space throughout the city in the weeks before elections. You find the house by the inscription and by the door slave, the ostiarius, a man seated in a small cubicle just inside the entrance, whose job is to control access to the household and to receive visitors. You state your business. The door slave looks at you, a specific kind of look, the horizontal assessment of someone reading social position from physical presentation, and then he takes the bundle without another word and closes the door. The transaction is complete. You are standing on a street in Pompeii with the cord that tied the bundle still in your hand, and you have perhaps a full hour and a half before you need to be back at the fullonica. and Stephanus said to be back by the second hour past midday, which is still far away, and you understand that you are not going to walk directly back. You are not going to run. You are not going to do anything that would draw the wrong kind of attention. But there is a difference between the most direct route back and the only acceptable route back, and on this particular morning, in the particular way that 4 years of the fullonica and 17 years before it have shaped your understanding of what is yours and what is not, you choose a longer path. You walk back toward the forum. Not into it. You do not walk into the forum's open space, which is the domain of civic business and political life and religious observance, spaces that belong to citizens and magistrates and priests and the public apparatus of Roman governance. But you walk along its edge, where the colonnaded border meets the street, and you look at the travertine paving and the columns and the temple facade at the far end, and the scattered figures moving across the open space on their own business. The forum of a Roman city is designed to be looked at. Its dimensions, its proportions, its orientation, all of it is calculated to produce an experience of the civic and divine order of Rome. The Temple of Jupiter at the north end stands on a high podium, its columns and pediment elevated above the surrounding structures, so that it can be seen from the forum's length and from many streets approaching the square. This is intentional. The temple's visibility is an argument about whose authority shapes the world. You look at it for a moment. Then you turn east and walk back along the Via dell'Abbondanza toward the fullonica, and as you walk you allow yourself to see the city in a way that the work does not usually permit. Pompeii has 2 theaters. You have never been inside either of them, but you have heard them, the sound of a crowd carrying over the buildings on certain evenings when the wind is right. The large theater can hold approximately 5,000 people. It hosts not only dramatic performances, the comedies and tragedies that are the formal theatrical tradition, but also mimes and other popular entertainments that draw audiences from across the social spectrum. Slaves are permitted to attend performances, though the Augustan law on seating separates them clearly. The upper section of the covered walkway, the crypta, is designated for foreigners, slaves, and the poor, access through a separate external staircase. The view from up there is not ideal. You have heard the sound of 5,000 people laughing and never seen what they were laughing at. You pass the Thermopolium 2 doors down from the fullonica. The counter is made of masonry, L-shaped, set with large ceramic vessels, dolia, sunk into the stone surface and filled with food that is kept warm by proximity to the charcoal that heats the counter from below. The vessels contain today what they contain on most days, a grain porridge of some kind, cooked beans, whatever the day's prepared food is. The man who operates the counter is visible in the dim interior, moving between the back room and the serving area. He glances at you as you pass. You nod. He nods back. The nod of 2 people who occupy adjacent spaces in the city's geography without sharing its social categories. You step through the entrance of the fullonica. The smell comes back immediately. It always does this. The contrast so complete that re-entering the building after time outside is a kind of sensory reset. The street smell fades. The fullonica smell rises. The light drops from the brightness of late morning to the dimmer, courtyard-filtered quality of the interior. The sound of the city becomes muffled and then is replaced by the sounds of the building, water in the basins, Drusus in the rinsing pool, Philemon somewhere in the back. You are back. You place the cord from the bundle delivery on the storage shelf near the entrance where cord and string are kept for future use. Nothing is wasted in the fullonica. Every piece of useful material is retained. You wash your hands in the overflow from the rinsing basin. You tie on your working belt. You step into the treading stall. The morning has not waited for you. The queue of garments is roughly where it was when you left, perhaps slightly shorter. Drusus and Philemon have continued working in your absence, and 2 garments have been moved forward in the process. The rhythm of the building absorbed your absence without disrupting itself, which is both efficient and, in a way you do not let yourself examine at length, a comment on what a body in this space is worth as a unit of function rather than as a person. You begin to tramp. The city outside is in full mid-morning operation. On the Via dell'Abbondanza, the electoral campaign that has been running for the past several weeks continues at its painted pace. Pompeii's political life operates through elections held each spring in which citizens vote for 2 pairs of magistrates, the duoviri, the senior pair, and the aediles, who handle public works and city maintenance. The campaigns that precede these elections produce the painted wall inscriptions you have been seeing since you arrived in this city, the red and black text endorsing candidates in the formulaic language of Roman civic endorsement. Anyone can endorse a candidate. Anyone can commission a painted endorsement or have a sign painter add their name to an existing one. The walls of Pompeii are covered with hundreds of these notices, some of them contradictory, some of them bizarre. Archaeologists centuries from now will find one that appears to be an endorsement from the petty thieves of the city, whether as a joke or a statement of something else entirely. The political system of this city does not include you. You know this not as an abstraction, but as a daily reality. The things that are decided in the forum about streets and water and public events and civic order are decided by people whose names are on those walls. And those people are not you, and the outcomes of their decisions arrive in your life as given conditions rather than as choices. Today the aqueduct water is flowing. Today the drains beneath the Via dell'Abbondanza are functioning. Today the city has organized itself in a way that includes the fullonica in its infrastructure. These are not things you chose. They are things that happen to you, and you work within them. You work the cloth. The garment under your feet now is one of the undyed wool lengths that arrived from a weaving workshop 3 days ago. It is in the last stage of its processing. The lanolin has been worked out by 2 previous trampling sessions. The fibers have been rinsed and partially dried, and what remains now is the final cleaning pass before it goes to the simoleon earth treatment and the press, and then on to whatever dyer or tailor is waiting for it. Undyed wool that comes through the fullonica is going to become something, a cloak, a tunic, a length of cloth that will be cut and assembled by hands that are not yours, worn by a body that will not know what happened to produce the clean surface it presses against. You think about this less than you used to. In the first year, you thought about it often, the invisible chain of hands that clothes pass through between the sheep and the body that wears them, shearing, washing, combing, spinning, weaving, fulling, dyeing, cutting, sewing, wearing. Each stage performed by someone whose contribution is erased by the next stage, all of it converging on a single finished garment that arrives on its wearer with no evidence of what produced it. Now you think about the texture under your feet, and the angle of pressure required, and whether the solution in the basin has degraded enough to need refreshing. The practical displaces the philosophical when the practical is what keeps you functional. By midday, the delivery errand has folded itself back into the texture of the day so completely that it might not have happened. You eat your bread and your olives. You drink your posca. You sit in the corner of the courtyard with your back against the stone that has absorbed the morning heat, and you look at the patch of sky above the open courtyard, a rectangle of blue that is always exactly this blue at this hour in August in Campania, and you let your body rest. Drusus beside you says, "How was the street?" You say, "Bright." He says nothing for a moment. Then he says, "The Forum." You say, "I walked past the edge." He says nothing more. You understand what this means to him. 11 years in this building, whatever his life was before. The particular value of hearing someone describe walking past the Forum as though it is a thing that simply happened. You do not elaborate. You do not perform the experience for him. You have described it as it was, and that is what he wanted. Not drama, just the fact of the city reported by someone who was briefly in it. Philemon is eating with his knees pulled up, listening. You do not look at him directly, but you are aware of him listening, and you know that the street for Philemon is something much further away than it is for either you or Drusus. 6 months in this building, still flinching at loud sounds, still sitting up at night holding his knees, Philemon is in a part of the process you and Drusus have already passed through, and there is nothing you can do to shorten it. The midday rest ends. You return to the basin. The afternoon is long in the way that summer afternoons in enclosed buildings are long, not because the time moves slowly, but because the heat accumulates without relief, and accumulated heat has a weight to it that adds to every motion. The wet cloth is heavier. The grip on the stall walls takes more effort to maintain. The walk from the treading stall to the rinsing basin is a walk across a courtyard that has stored the afternoon sun in its paving stones and releases it upward through your feet. You tramp, you ring, you carry. There is a moment in the late afternoon when you are on the terrace with the teasel heads, working the surface of a length of dried wool, and you can see the upper slope of the mountain. Vesuvius is visible from the upper level of the fullonica, not all of it, only the upper portion above the roofline of the buildings across the Via dell'Abbondanza. It rises to the north, its profile broad and irregular, with the vegetation on its slopes dense and green in the August light. The mountain is not a dramatic presence in the daily life of this city. It is simply there, background, constant, unremarkable. The geographical feature that shapes the bay and defines the horizon and produces the soil that grows the wine. The Pompeians have lived in its shadow for generations, and their relationship to it is the relationship of familiarity. It is the mountain, it is north, it is where the good farms are. You look at it for a few seconds. Then you look back at the cloth. There is something in the quality of the air today that is slightly different from yesterday. You have noticed it without naming it, a heaviness that is not only the summer heat, a particular quality to the light that you cannot precisely describe. The sky is clear and blue. The sun is doing what the August sun does, and yet there is something underneath the normal afternoon that is not quite normal. You cannot locate it. It does not have a name in any language you speak. You draw the teasel across the wool. The cloth is ready. You carry it back down the stair. The rest of the afternoon passes in the rhythm of the closing work. The sorting, the pressing, the folding, the draining and covering of the basins. There is a particular kind of attention required for the closing stages that is different from the attention required for the processing stages. In the morning, the work asks for sustained physical engagement, the body in motion, the muscles maintaining their rhythm. In the closing, the work asks for precision. Garments folded correctly will stay in correct condition through the night. Garments folded sloppily will arrive at the press tomorrow with creases in the wrong places, and garments that arrive at the press with creases in the wrong places will leave the fullonica with a record of their own mishandling visible in their surface. You fold with care. The toga praetexta that was worked this morning comes through the press under Drusus's hands and emerges with the flat brilliance that the press produces. The surface of the wool compressed and aligned, the fibers laid flat in a way that catches light evenly. You take it from Drusus and fold it along its natural lines, following the geometry of the draping configuration it will return to when a body wears it, and you place it at the top of the collection pile near the entrance. Stephanus will see it first thing in the morning. It is good work. You know it is good work the same way you know when it is not, through the accumulated evidence of your own hands having done this enough times that the standard is internal, not external, not dependent on Stephanus's inspection to confirm it. This is something that no one can take from you, not the ledger, not the price paid at the Puteoli market, not the four walls of this building. The knowledge of your own standard. Stephanus conducts his evening review. The folded garments are stacked for collection tomorrow. The stalls are closed. The broom goes across the courtyard floor. In the sleeping room, after the lamp in the corridor dims, you lie on the rope bed and listen to the city moving through its evening. The sounds tonight are as they are on any evening in August. The thermopolium still serving, a voice somewhere on the street raised briefly and then dropped. The particular rhythm of a city that stays alive in its public spaces after dark, in ways that its working population never fully sees. You can hear the music from what sounds like several streets away, the sound of a tibia, the double reeded instrument that accompanies banquets and festivals and public performances, carried through the streets as sound always is in a city built of stone and plaster, moving between walls, arriving diminished but recognizable. Someone is having a dinner party tonight. Someone is wearing a toga that passed through these hands. You close your eyes. The slight heaviness in the air that you noticed on the terrace is still present, or you think it is. It is difficult to know, in the dark and at the end of a full working day, whether you are perceiving something or only remembering having perceived it. Your body is tired in the distributed way of physical work. Feet, lower legs, the tendons in the backs of your hands, the muscles across your upper back from the carrying. This is the tiredness of use. You have used yourself today. Drusus is breathing steadily already. Philemon has stopped his evening sitting and is lying down. Whether asleep or not you cannot tell. You let the day go in the particular way you have learned to let days go, which is not by thinking about them, but by allowing their texture to dissipate, the way ammonia dissipates from a basin that has been left uncovered, gradually and then completely. The last thing before sleep is the sound of the water in the pipes. It runs beneath the floor of the building, beneath the street, beneath the city, the continuous pressure of the aqueduct that Claudius commissioned the renovation of before you were born, that Augustus built in its first iteration a lifetime before that carries water from the springs near Misenum across the Campanian plain to the distribution tower at the northern edge of Pompeii, and then into the buildings and fountains and basins of the city through its network of lead pipes. The water runs in the dark. The mountain sits in the dark. You sleep. 3 days later, the water stops. Not all of it, not all at once, but in the morning of the day after the night that you felt the first tremor, a slight shuddering in the stone floor of the sleeping room. Barely enough to wake you fully, the kind of thing that might be a heavy cart on the street except that it came from below rather than from outside, and lasted slightly too long to be a cart. In the morning after that night, the flow from the pipe that feeds the rinsing basin is reduced. You notice it before Stephanus does. The basin fills more slowly than usual. You can see it in the level of the water, in the pace at which the surface rises after the plug is pulled for the overnight refreshing. By the time Drusus arrives at the rinsing pool, you have already assessed the situation and formed a conclusion, and the conclusion is, the pipe pressure has dropped. This has happened before, in smaller ways. The water distribution system of Pompeii is complex, and its complexity creates vulnerabilities. The Castellum Aqua, the lead-lined distribution tank at the north end of the city where the main aqueduct channel terminates, feeds the city through 3 separate channels at different levels, serving different purposes. The topmost channel feeds the thermae, the public baths. The middle channel feeds the private households. The lowest channel feeds the public fountains. In times of shortage or pressure reduction, the system is designed to prioritize the fountains, to ensure that the population can still access water even if private and commercial supplies are reduced. The fullonica is on the middle channel. A pressure drop in the middle channel means the fountains are still flowing. The Pompeians who draw their water from the 40-plus public fountains scattered through the city will still have water today. But the basins in this building will fill more slowly than they should, which means the morning's processing schedule will run behind. You tell Stephanus when he appears in the courtyard. He looks at the basin. He looks at the pipe. He makes the sound, not quite a word. And then he looks at you in a way that asks a question without asking it, and you say, perhaps by the afternoon it will be restored. This is what you have seen happen before, a temporary reduction, an adjustment somewhere in the system, a restoration within hours. The water infrastructure of this city has been repaired and modified continuously over the past decade and a half, and small disruptions are not uncommon. Stephanus nods. He says, work with what there is. You work with what there is. The morning proceeds, slower in its rinsing stages than it would be at full pressure. The treading stalls can operate normally. The solution in the basins does not require continuous replenishment during use. Only the initial fill and the periodic refresh. It is the rinsing stage where the reduced flow is felt. Drusus working the rinsed cloth through a pool that refills more slowly than the work requires, creating a backup in the process that ripples through the rest of the day's sequence. You adjust. This is a skill that does not appear in any ledger but that you have applied every day for 4 years. The skill of adjusting to what is available rather than what is optimal. The fullonica has a capacity and a rate, and on days when some element of the process is reduced, a shortage of simoleon earth, a garment that requires more time than the queue allows, a worker who is sick, you redistribute the work without reducing its quality. You do not wait to be told how. You read the situation and respond. By mid-morning, you have found the pace that the reduced water supply permits and matched the day's work to it. Outside, the city is operating with its customary morning energy, and the reduced water pressure in private pipes has not yet made itself felt as a civic problem. The public fountains are flowing. The thermae baths are operating. Whatever disruption has touched the distribution system is specific enough and limited enough that most of Pompeii's residents will not register it today. But in the fullonica, you have registered it, and in the part of you that tracks variations in the normal, the part that noticed the heaviness in the air 3 days ago, the part that woke when the floor shuddered 2 nights ago, you are tracking this too. The tremor 2 nights ago was small. Small enough that you might have dismissed it entirely had you not been awake at the time. You had not been fully asleep. The heat and the something in the air that had been present for several days had made sleep shallow and intermittent, and when the shuddering came, you were awake enough to register it precisely. It lasted perhaps 4 or 5 seconds. It moved through the stone of the floor, and then through the stone of the walls, and then it was gone, and the city outside did not alter its ambient sound in response. No shouts, no crash of falling objects, nothing that suggested the tremor had been powerful enough to disturb anything above its foundation-level rumble. Drosis, you are almost certain, also woke. Neither of you said anything. Pompeii has earthquakes. This is a known quantity. The earthquake 16 years ago that damaged the city so significantly was the largest in living memory, but smaller tremors have been common in this region for as long as records exist. The Campanian plain is geologically active. The Romans have known this for centuries, since the hot springs at Baiae and the volcanic fields at Pozzuoli demonstrate it continuously. A small tremor in the night is, within the framework of life in this region, a thing that happens and then is noted and then is moved past. You are moving past it, or you are trying to. The cloth under your feet today is a series of garments from the household of a wealthy merchant whose account with Stephanus is one of the Fullonica's larger ongoing relationships. 2 wool togas, one of high quality, 3 tunics of varying weight, a length of finished cloth that appears to be headed for conversion into something, curtains possibly, or a lightweight indoor covering of the kind used in formal dining spaces to reduce the heat admitted by open windows. The merchant's household generates enough laundry to keep a portion of the Fullonica's capacity occupied through most of the week. You tramp the first toga. The ammonia in the solution reaches you, and you breathe through your mouth for the first minutes. The heat in the courtyard at this hour is already significant. The sun has cleared the east wall and is now filling the open space with direct light that has been building intensity since dawn. In the basins, the solution warms as the morning progresses. Warm solution is slightly more effective chemically than cold solution. The ammonia more active, the grease in the fibers dissolving more readily. This is a thing you know from experience rather than from any explanation. Philemon takes his position in the second stall. He moves differently than he did when he arrived 6 months ago. The flinching at loud sounds has not entirely stopped, but it has reduced, a perceptible reduction, from a sharp full body response to a briefer, smaller reaction that he contains more quickly now. His work in the basin has developed the efficiency that comes from repetition. His feet know the motion, his hands know the grip. His body has calibrated itself to the specific demands of the treading stall the way bodies always calibrate to their imposed routines. He does not smile in the mornings. He does not look up very much, but he works steadily, and steadiness in this place is its own form of survival. You do not know his story. You know only that he was sold through the Naples market, which takes its consignments from the coastal trading routes, ships coming up from Sicily and across from the North African coast, and down from the ports of the Adriatic. The eastern Mediterranean, from which you came, also feeds into the Naples market. But the lot that included Philemon was described by Stephanus at the time of purchase as arriving from a northern route. This means somewhere in the territories north of Rome, or possibly from Gaul, or from across the Rhine where the legions push and push against a frontier that never quite becomes stable. He could be from anywhere. He could be from a farm that was taken, or a town that was overrun, or a port that was raided. He could have been sold by people who needed money, or taken by soldiers who didn't ask. He could have walked most of the way here, or come most of the way by sea. You know none of these things. You know that he is perhaps 15 years old, and that he eats his food quickly, and holds his knees at night, and has not cried in the fullonica, at least not where you have seen. You tramp the toga. The morning moves in its rhythm. By midday, the water pressure has partially recovered. The basin is filling at perhaps 3/4 of its normal rate, which is enough to run the afternoon's rinsing without significant delay. Whatever adjustment was made in the distribution system, or whatever temporary disruption has resolved itself, the flow has returned to a functional level. Stephanus notes this when he appears for his midday review, running a hand along the pipe fitting and then looking at the basin level, with the expression of a man whose concern has diminished but not quite disappeared. He says nothing to you about it. You eat your bread. Today there are no olives. There are dried figs, 2 of them, the small dried variety that are a standard provision in working households across the empire. A concentrated source of calories that keeps a body functional through the long afternoon. You eat them slowly. Figs in this dried form have a specific taste, intensely sweet, slightly fermented at the skin, with a dense texture that holds the sugar of the fresh fruit in preserved form. You have eaten so many of them in the last 4 years that they have become simply a part of the daily texture rather than something with taste. But today, for some reason, you notice them. The Fullonica's food provision is not generous, but it is consistent. Cato, writing about the management of agricultural estates 2 centuries before this moment, specified exact rations for slaves working different roles. Field workers receiving 4 to 4.5 modi of grain per month, managers receiving 3. The calculus was simple and recorded without embarrassment. The body that works requires fuel in proportion to its output, and the fuel must be provided by whoever owns the output. In the city, the rations are not so formally codified, but the principle is the same. Stephanus feeds you because you must be functional. Functional workers produce clean garments. Clean garments produce income. The chain is short and entirely legible. You have never been hungry in this building. You have rarely been full. Drusus is watching you eat the fig. Not obviously, not with any expression. Just a brief glance that you catch in your peripheral vision, and that you understand as the particular attention of a man who notices when something is slightly different about another person's relationship to ordinary things. He says nothing, you say nothing. The fig is eaten. The afternoon begins. You are on the terrace in the mid-afternoon when the second tremor arrives. It is larger than the first. It comes through the floor of the terrace, through the stone of the upper level, through the wooden framework of the drying frames, into the soles of your feet, and it lasts longer than the night tremor, perhaps 8 seconds, perhaps 10. Difficult to count accurately when the sensation is moving through you. The drying frames vibrate. The cloth draped over them moves in a ripple that has nothing to do with wind. From somewhere in the city to the east, you hear the sound of something ceramic, a vessel probably on a high shelf striking a floor. Then it stops. You are standing on the terrace holding a teasel head. Below you in the courtyard, you hear Stephanus's voice, a single sharp word that you recognize as the Latin for stop, addressed to no one in particular or to the building itself. Then silence. Then from outside on the Via dell'Abbondanza, voices beginning, the particular vocal frequency of a street that has just experienced something unexpected, the rise and question of people who have felt the same thing and are verifying it with each other. You look at the mountain. It is there, as it is always there. Its profile unchanged. No smoke, no visible movement, no alteration in the broad green profile of its upper slope. The sky above it is still blue. The afternoon light is still what afternoon light is. You go back down the stair. In the courtyard, Drusus is standing beside the rinsing basin with his hands at his sides, looking at the water in the basin, which is still moving in a small sloshing pattern from the tremor's disturbance. Philemon is in the doorway of the sleeping room, his eyes wide, not quite frightened, but close to it, or rather, frightened in a specific controlled way, the way that someone who has already lost everything once controls their fear of losing it again. Stephanus appears. He looks at the basins, the walls, the connections of the pipes. He looks for damage. You look too. The stone walls of the fullonica have not cracked, or if they have, not visibly. The pipe fittings are intact. The press in the back room is undisturbed. The stacked garments near the entrance have not fallen. The building has taken the tremor and held. Stephanus says, "Back to work." You go back to work. This is the only possible response. The tremor is over. The building is standing. The garments in the queue have not been processed, and the day has not extended itself to accommodate the interruption. You go back to the teasel work on the terrace, carrying it with you the information that the mountain is still there, still unchanged, still green and broad against the blue sky of August. The afternoon work is quieter after the tremor. Not slower, but quieter. The three of you moving through the tasks with a focus that is slightly more pointed than usual, attention drawn inward, the normal ambient hum of the day's work functioning at a lower frequency. Stephanus moves through the building more frequently than usual, conducting the kind of small repeated checks that people conduct when they are managing the residue of an unexpected event, looking at the walls again, at the pipes again, at the press again, at the stacked garments. You tramp, you carry, you press. On the terrace, in the last of the afternoon light, you spend a long time looking at the mountain. It is simply there. You think about the fact that you have no framework for evaluating what a tremor means in the context of this particular mountain above this particular city. The Romans know about volcanoes. They know about Etna in Sicily, whose eruptions are part of mythology and history alike, written into the accounts of Greek and Roman writers who have described it for centuries. They know about the volcanic fields at Pozzuoli, the Phlegrean fields where the ground is hot in places and sulfurous gas seeps from vents, and the landscape has the quality of a place where the earth is doing something ongoing. But Vesuvius is different, or is believed to be different. Its profile is irregular in a way that a geologist centuries from now would recognize as the remnant of a previous eruption so ancient that no human culture in this region has any record of it. Its slopes are fertile and green and planted with vines. Its summit is occupied by a crater rim that local people walk to for the view, a pleasant excursion on a clear day. It does not look like a volcano. You do not have that word. The Latin word for what this mountain is does not yet exist in the form it will take after this summer. The Romans call it Vesuvius or Vespius, and they know it as a mountain and a landmark and a geographical feature of the Campanian plain. What it is beneath its green surface, the chamber of superheated material that has been building pressure for the 1500 years since its last eruption, is not part of any knowledge available to you or to anyone else in this city. You carry the last armload of pressed cloth to the entrance. You drain the basins. You sweep the courtyard. The evening review is brief. Stephanus says less than usual. He checks the ledger, checks the garments, and then goes into his interior rooms in a way that closes the day without ceremony. In the sleeping room, Drusus lies down immediately. Philemon sits for his evening time, but shorter than usual. 5 minutes, perhaps. Instead of the usual 10 to 15, he lies down. His breathing slows. You lie on the rope bed in the warm room and listen. Outside, the city is quieter than usual in its evening. The tremor has not caused obvious damage. You have not heard the sounds of major structural collapse. No sustained alarm, no organized response of the kind that a serious earthquake produces, but it has altered the evening's character slightly. The thermopolium next door is quieter. The voices on the street are at a different register, less the loose social frequency of an ordinary evening, more the clipped checking-in register of people who are processing something. Pompeii has a collective memory of the earthquake 16 years ago that gives the city's residents a reference point for tremors. Those who lived through the 62nd-year earthquake carry the specific body memory of what significant ground movement produces, the sound of collapsing masonry, the sight of walls separating from their foundations, the particular quality of a city whose built environment has suddenly become unreliable. Drusus was here at the time and would have been in his late 20s. A small tremor like today's sits in comparison to that memory as a reminder rather than an event, uncomfortable but survivable, known within a known category. You do not have that memory. You arrived in Pompeii 4 years after the earthquake, and the earthquake for you is an absence in the city's fabric, the buildings that are still being repaired, the walls that are newer than their neighbors, the places where the repair work's color does not quite match the older plaster beside it. You have heard about the earthquake from Drusus in the minimal way that Drusus discusses anything, a few sentences, specific and dry, delivered once and not repeated, enough to understand that it was large and damaging and frightening, not enough to know what it felt like from inside. Today's tremor you felt yourself. You are adding it to your own account. The mountain is quiet. The water in the pipes is running. You focus on that, the sound of the water, continuous, pressure maintained, the invisible infrastructure of this city doing its ordinary work in the dark. The sound is constant. It has been constant every night you have listened to it. It is the sound of the city persisting, of the system working, of the infrastructure that was built and maintained and repaired and extended, holding together beneath the stone and plaster of the buildings above it. You focus on that sound. The day has been what days are. long, specific, complete in its demands and its small details. The delivery 2 days ago, the mid-afternoon tremor, the fig, the water pressure that dropped and then partially returned, Philemon's controlled fear, Drusus's sideways glance, the mountain in the afternoon light, green and unchanged. You let each of these things exist, and then you let them go. The room cools slowly. The sounds from the street thin and then cease. At some point in the late hours, you are almost entirely asleep, balanced at the edge of it, when you feel the floor move again. Not a tremor this time, something smaller, barely a vibration, more like the building settling than the earth moving, the kind of thing that a stone structure does in the temperature changes of the night. It passes in 2 seconds and does not return. You lie still. You listen. The breathing of the 2 other people in this room, the faint creak of the building settling in the night air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog. Outside, the mountain sits against the stars in the way it has sat against every night sky above this city for longer than the city has existed, patient, enormous, entirely itself. The night is the 23rd of August. You do not know this precisely. You know the season, the heat, the weight of the weeks that have accumulated since midsummer. But the number of the day is a fact that exists in the Roman calendar and not yet in your body, where time is measured in tremors and in the quality of air and in the expression on Drusus's face when he bent over the rinsing basin this afternoon and watched the water shaking in its surface for longer than necessary before straightening up and returning to his work. You breathe. The room is warm. The mountain is silent. Sleep comes, or something close enough to sleep that the difference will not matter when morning arrives. The room goes dark in the way that rooms go dark when the person inside them finally stops watching. And the city holds. And the mountain holds its silence. And somewhere in the deep stone beneath the farms and the vineyards and the roads and the buildings and the 40 public fountains and the 11 fullonica and the 2 theaters and the forum with its travertine paving and the temple of Jupiter at its north end, somewhere beneath all of that, something that has been building for a very long time continues quietly to build. The morning of August the 24th begins the way all mornings have begun. Before light, stone floor, the rope bed releasing you into the dark. You dress without looking, belt, cord. Your feet find the threshold of the sleeping room the way they always find it, the slight drop from the room's floor to the corridor. Barely a finger's width, but known. Everything in this building is known. You have walked every surface of it so many times that the knowledge has migrated from your mind into your feet and hands, into the parts of the body that do not require thought. You step into the courtyard. The sky above the open atrium is the color of something about to become blue. Not blue yet. The pre-dawn gray that holds the stars on one side and the coming light on the other. And in Pompeii in August, this transition happens quickly. The sky over Campania does not linger in ambiguity. It moves from dark to light with a directness that you have observed every morning for 4 years. Something is different today. You stand in the courtyard for a moment longer than usual. The air has a quality you have been trying to name for the past several days. The heaviness, the particular weight that is not only summer heat, that sits in the lungs slightly differently than ordinary August morning air. Today it is stronger. Today it has a trace of something beneath it, something sulfurous and mineral, faint enough that you might be imagining it, close enough to the ordinary smell of the fullonica that it would be easy to dismiss. You do not dismiss it. You look toward the north, toward the mountain, but the mountain is not visible from the courtyard floor, only from the terrace above. You do not go up to look. The basins need to be assessed, the solution levels checked, the morning's garment queue reviewed. The work begins the same way it always begins. You lower yourself into the first treading stall. Drusus appears in the rinsing pool doorway. He looks at you. There is something in the look, not alarm, because Drusus does not alarm, not after 11 years in this city, but attention, the kind of attention that a man pays when he is tracking something he cannot yet name. He does not say anything. You do not say anything. Philemon comes out of the sleeping room and takes his position. The morning work begins. The garments in the queue today are ordinary. A set of tunics from a merchant household, a length of wool that arrived yesterday from a weaving workshop on the north side of the city, 2 togas belonging to the magistrate's family whose mark you know from the embroidered hem symbol. You tramp the first tunic. The solution in the basin is correct. The overnight collection was sufficient, the ammonia level appropriate for the morning's first work. Your feet know the basin floor. Your hands know the stall walls. The city outside wakes on schedule. By the time the morning light has fully established itself over the courtyard, the Via dell'Abbondanza has its customary morning traffic. Voices, the creak of a shutter being opened, the smell of the bakery 2 doors east beginning its first firing of the day. The thermopolium next door is preparing its counter. Pompeii is doing what Pompeii does on a morning in late August, which is everything it always does, in the order it always does it. At some point in the mid-morning, you notice the light. It is difficult to describe precisely. The light in the courtyard has changed in a way that is not the light changing with the hour. That progression you know completely. The angle of the sun as it clears the east wall and moves across the courtyard floor. The specific quality of the illumination at each point in the morning. This is different. The light has acquired a quality that is not quite shadow but is close to it. A slight dimming that is not a cloud, because the sky visible above the courtyard is still clear, or mostly clear, or clear in a way that is slightly wrong. You look up. The sky to the north is not the right color. You cannot see the mountain from the courtyard. You can see only the rectangle of sky above the open atrium. But the northern quadrant of that sky, the edge of it, the portion visible above the north wall of the building, has a quality that does not belong to a clear August morning. It is the color of something that has been mixed into the light. Not smoke exactly, not cloud, something between them, a brownish gray at the edge of the blue that is growing as you watch. You feel the floor move. Not a tremor of the kind you have felt before, not the brief vibration of the stone, the rolling sensation of underground movement that arrives and passes in seconds. This is different. This is sustained. This is the building registering something that has not stopped, a continuous low-frequency shuddering that comes through the soles of your feet and through the walls and through the stone of the stall you are standing in, and it does not stop. You step out of the basin. Drusus is already standing beside the rinsing pool, his hands at his sides, looking at the water. The surface of the water in the rinsing basin is moving, Not the small sloshing of a brief tremor, but a continuous agitation. The water alive with vibration. The surface breaking into small patterns that have no relationship to wind or drainage. From outside, from the Via dell'Abbondanza, you hear the first change in the city's sound. It is not panic, not yet. It is the sound of a street that has registered something and is in the process of interpreting it, the particular frequency of voices rising slightly, the sound of someone calling to someone else in the specific register of a question rather than a statement. Stephanus comes out of the interior rooms. He is dressed, which means he was awake, which means he noticed the vibration before coming out, rather than being woken by it. He looks at the courtyard. He looks at the basins. He looks at you. You say the water in the basin is moving. There is something on the mountain. He looks up. From where he is standing, near the center of the courtyard, the same slice of northern sky is visible that you can see from the treading stall. He looks at it for a moment. The brownish gray at the northern edge of the sky has grown since you first noticed it. It is wider now. It has a shape that is vertical rather than horizontal, a column of something, rising, visible above the roofline to the north. Stephanus says one word. He says, "Go." He does not say where. He does not say how. The instruction is complete in a single syllable, and its meaning is entirely clear. And it is the first time in 4 years that Stephanus has said it. You go. You move through the back of the fullonica toward the sleeping room, not because you intend to stay there, but because there is something in the sleeping room that belongs to you, and you are not going to leave it. Beneath the rope bed, secured in a gap in the stone floor where 2 slabs do not quite meet, you have kept a small object for 4 years, a ceramic token, roughly the size of your thumb, stamped with a pattern you do not remember the significance of, taken from your mother's house in the village in Macedonia before the soldiers came. You do not know what it means. You know that it is the only thing from before. You take it. You come back into the courtyard. Drusus is wrapping something, a length of cloth from the processing pile, the cleanest thing available, around his head and shoulders. Philemon is standing in the center of the courtyard, looking up at the sky, very still, with the expression of a boy who has encountered something that exceeds any prior category. You take his arm. You say, "We go now." The 3 of you move through the fullonica to the entrance on the Via dell'Abbondanza. The street is already different. In the time since you last heard it from inside the building, the character of the sound has shifted entirely. The voices have a different quality now, not the organized ambient of a working morning, but the fragmented, overlapping, directional sound of people in motion. You can see from the threshold of the fullonica figures moving east and west on the Via dell'Abbondanza, some of them quickly, some of them carrying things, some of them looking northward with expressions that range from bafflement to fear. To the north, above the roofline, the column is visible. It has risen since you last saw a portion of it from the courtyard. It is large, vastly larger than anything you have seen rise from any source. It extends upward from the mountain in a way that does not behave the way smoke behaves. It does not drift or disperse, but rises with a force that is visible even from this distance, a vertical column that reaches a height you cannot estimate because you have no reference for it, and then spreads at the top in a shape that one observer across the bay, a man named Gaius Caecilius Secundus, 18 years old, watching from Misenum, will later describe as resembling an umbrella pine tree. He will write this down in a letter. He will be the only person to leave a written record of what is happening right now in your field of vision. The column rises. The sky to the north is the color of bruising. You hear the first sound from the mountain, not thunder, not the familiar sound of a summer storm moving over the Apennines, but something deeper and less directional, a sound that comes through the ground as much as through the air, the voice of something that does not have a voice in any language you know. People on the Via dell'Abbondanza are moving east. East is away from the mountain. East leads to the Sarno Gate, to the road south towards Stabile, to the coast, to the possibility of boats. You know this from the geography of your delivery errand, and from what Drusus has told you in the minimal way that Drusus tells things, enough to orient, no more. You move east with the street. Philemon is beside you, matching your pace without having to be told. Drusus is behind you. You can hear him, his distinctive step on the paving stones, the weight of a man whose body has been in this city for 11 years and who is moving through it now at a pace that is controlled without being slow. The first pieces of pumice reach the street at perhaps midday. They are small at first, lightweight, porous stones the size of hazelnuts, pale gray, falling from the column above at a rate that is initially scattered and then gradually not scattered. You know what pumice is. You have used pumice in the fullonica. It is one of the abrasive materials applied to fabric surfaces at the finishing stage, available in the market, unremarkable. What is falling from the sky now is the same material from a different source. It comes from the mountain at the velocity of something ejected with extraordinary force, falls for long enough to slow, and arrives at street level as a pattering that becomes in minutes a rain. The people around you tie things over their heads. You pull the cord of your belt over the back of your head, a crude protection, knowing it is inadequate, wearing it anyway because inadequate is better than nothing. Beside you, Philemon has put both hands over his head. Drusus has the cloth he wrapped at the fullonica, and he pulls it forward over his face. The pumice rain thickens. The column above the mountain is still rising. The sound from the north is continuous now, not a single event, but a sustained voice. The mountain expressing something that has been held inside it for 1,500 years. The sky is changing color overhead, the blue retreating before the spreading canopy of ash and material that the column ejects and the upper winds carry south, toward Pompeii, toward the coast, toward everything that is south of the mountain. The street is crowded now. The orderly motion of the morning, people going to work, merchants opening stalls, the customary managed flow of a busy Roman street has been replaced by a movement that is still not quite panic, but that has the structure of fear given direction. Everyone is moving away from the sound. Everyone is moving away from the mountain. The directional principle is simple and universal, and it means that the Via dell'Abbondanza, which runs east-west, is becoming a river of bodies moving east. You move with them. The pumice underfoot changes the character of the paving stones, the smooth limestone, worn by generations of feet and wheels, acquires a crunching, shifting surface as the falling material accumulates in the channels between the stones and on the flat surfaces. Each step is slightly less certain than the step before. Each minute, the air contains a little more of what the mountain is releasing, the ash and fine particulate that the column deposits at lower altitudes, a haze that is beginning to soften the edges of the buildings around you, that is settling into the folds of clothing and the surfaces of skin. You are near the eastern edge of the city when the first roof comes down. You do not see it happen. You hear it, the specific sound of a loaded structure reaching its limit. The crack and then the collapse, coming from somewhere in the block to your north, close enough to feel in your chest. The pumice accumulation on rooftops is sufficient by this point to test the older structures. The earthquake 16 years ago left cracks in load-bearing walls throughout the city. Those cracks are meeting the weight of the mountain's output now. The crowd around you moves faster. Philemon is gripping your arm with both hands, which he was not doing a moment ago. And you do not pull away because his grip is information. He is telling you with his hands that he is present, that he needs you to be present, that whatever is happening requires the two of you to stay in contact. You maintain the pace. You move through the Sarno Gate, the eastern gate of Pompeii's walls, a narrowing of the human flow as the street channels through the gate's opening and onto the road beyond. The road south is not empty. It is full of Pompeii, moving. The scene on the road south of the Sarno Gate is the scene of a city evacuating, people on foot, people in carts, people carrying what they could lift and what they chose and what they discovered at the last moment they could not leave. There are household slaves carrying their masters' strong boxes. There are free citizens carrying nothing at all, moving with the lightness of people who made no decisions or who made all their decisions so quickly that the decisions had no weight. There are animals, a pair of mules, someone's dog moving through the crowd with the focused directness of an animal that has registered danger without any framework for interpreting it. The pumice is falling at a steady rate now. The sky to the north has closed. You cannot see the column anymore, not because it is no longer there, but because the canopy it has produced has spread far enough south to cover the sky above you. The blue is gone. What remains is a yellow-gray ceiling that sits lower than any natural cloud, that is not a cloud, that has no relationship to weather. That is the sky transformed into something else by the mountain's output. In this light, this wrong light, this light that is afternoon pretending to be something that afternoon is not, everything looks simultaneously too clear and too dim. The faces of the people around you are lit from no direction. The shadows have flattened and disappeared. Drusus says, "Keep moving." It is the most words he has spoken in a single direction since you have known him. You keep moving. The road south leads toward the coastal settlements, toward Stabiae, toward the villas along the bay, toward places where boats are kept, toward the water, which is the instinct of everyone on this road, and which you share without having reasoned it. The sea does not erupt. The sea is not the mountain. The sea is in the other direction, and it is where you are going. The afternoon, what the afternoon has become, passes in the motion of walking. In the crowd on the road south of Pompeii, you are one of thousands of people from this city and its surrounding farms and estates and villages, all of them moving in the same direction. All of them carrying the same information in their bodies, that what is behind them is not safe, and what is ahead of them is unknown but less immediately dangerous. The social categories that organized the city, citizen and slave, master and owned, free and not free, have not disappeared. They persist in the ways that people cluster and move, and who defers to whom when the road narrows. But they have become less audible in the general frequency of flight. In the crowd, your tunic is the same color as anyone else's tunic when it is covered in ash. You walk for a long time. The pumice rain slows as the afternoon progresses. It does not stop, nothing stops, but it becomes less dense, the stones smaller and more scattered, the accumulation on the road less rapid than in the first hours. This is not improvement. This is the eruption changing its character, moving from the sustained column and fall phase into something else. And what that something else is, you do not know. You only know the rain has thinned. Night comes in the wrong direction. Not from the east, where night arrives in the normal order, the sky darkening as the sun moves west. The darkness on this evening comes from the north, from the canopy of ash and material that the mountain has been building since midday, that has spread across the sky in the direction of the prevailing summer wind, and that now covers everything south of the mountain in a darkness that is not the darkness of night, but is something the night has borrowed from the event. By the time the darkness is complete, the total, textureless darkness that Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay, will describe in his letter as deeper than the thickest night, you have reached the coastal road above the bay. The sea is visible below. It is not calm. The shore along the bay has been disturbed by whatever underground forces have been accompanying the mountain's eruption. The water has retreated from its normal line in places, exposing seafloor that is not normally visible, and in other places is moving with an agitation that has nothing to do with wind. The boats that should be available at the small harbors south of Pompeii are a question you cannot yet answer. You sit on the road, the three of you. Drusus beside you, breathing. Philemon on your other side, very still. The ash falling now is fine, not the coarse pumice of the afternoon, but a fine dust that settles on surfaces and does not bounce, that accumulates in the folds of cloth and on the surfaces of skin with a quiet efficiency that is its own kind of pressure. You hold the ceramic token in your closed hand. The road behind you, the city you left, the fullonica on the Via dell'Abbondanza where the basins still hold the morning's unfinished solution, and the garments in the queue are still waiting for work that is not going to come. None of this is something you can see from here. Stephanus, who said go and whose whereabouts after that you did not track, is somewhere in the dark that contains everything you have left behind. You know what is in your hand and what is beside you and what is ahead of you, which is the dark road and the dark sea and the fine ash falling and the sound of the mountain, still present, still speaking, its voice arriving through the ground and through the air from a distance that is now several miles but that has not reduced to nothing. The sound does not stop. You are alive. This is the fact that contains everything else. You are alive. You are on the road. Your feet have carried you out of the city, and the night is dark in the wrong way, but it is a night you are inside of rather than absent from. You do not know what August the 25th will bring. The volcanologists who study this event centuries from now will tell you that the worst is still coming, that the column will collapse in the early hours of the next morning, that pyroclastic surges will reach Pompeii at dawn, that what the mountain sends in those hours is not ash and pumice, but superheated gas and material moving at 100 kilometers an hour, that anyone still inside the walls of Pompeii at that moment will not leave by walking. You do not know this. You know the road beneath you, the dark, the ash. Drusus beside you has been quiet for a long time. Then he says something in Greek, quietly. He says, "We are outside." He means the city. He means the walls. He means the specific fact of being on the road in the dark, rather than in the building. You say yes. He says nothing more. The word has been said, and it is sufficient. Philemon, on your other side, has fallen asleep, or something close enough to sleep that the distinction does not matter. He is breathing steadily. His head has dropped. He has been awake and afraid for the entire span of the day, and his body has reached the point where it can no longer maintain the cost of wakefulness, where the ash and the dark and the sound and the movement have accumulated past the threshold of what a 15-year-old body can hold without releasing some of it into unconsciousness. You let him sleep. You sit in the dark on the road above the bay with the ceramic token in your hand and the sound of the mountain behind you and the sea below you, and you breathe. The ash settles on your shoulders. The ash settles on the road. The ash settles on the city you have left, which is covering itself in layers that will build through this night, and through the night to come, and through the centuries beyond these nights, layer upon layer, until the city is not a city anymore, but a depth, a geography, a question that much later people will dig down into with careful tools and uncover in pieces. They will find the basins in the fullonica on the Via dell'Abbondanza. They will find the screw press intact. They will find the treading stalls with their stone floors worn smooth by the particular motion of feet working cloth in an alkaline solution. They will find everything except the 3 people who stood in the courtyard this morning and then walked out through the entrance and down the street and through the gate and south. Some things the ash preserves. Some things it only covers. You are on the road. The mountain is still speaking behind you. The sea is still moving in its disturbed way below. The ash falls with a patience that is not a living patience, but that has the quality of something that intends to continue for as long as it takes. And you sit with the token in your hand, and Philemon sleeping beside you, and Drusus breathing in the dark, and you let the night go forward in whatever direction it is going, and you do not close your eyes yet, and then you do. The sound of the mountain is the last thing, and then it is not the last thing, because you are still here, breathing, on the road, in the dark, which is not nothing, which is, in fact, everything that there is. Sleep well. If this story moved you, please consider leaving a like. It helps more people find their way here. Subscribe to Quiet History at Bedtime for more stories from the lives that history almost forgot. And if you made it all the way to the end of this night, thank you for being here. Good night.